University in 1998. In 2001, she completed her PhD studies and defended her thesis with the title Cognitive and Formal Structure of Conditional Constructions, supervised by Alexander Kibrik. And in the very same year, Marina joined the SR Morphology group and started working with Gravel Corbett. She collaborated to several fascinating projects, and I'd like to mention the extensive study of Archie lexicon, which included collection of sound files and cultural materials, and this project resulted in the digital dictionary of Archie language available online, one of the most comprehensive dictionaries of underrepresented languages. And since 2013, Marina has been focused on agreement in Archie, and she was the main driver of the exciting project From Competing Theories to Fieldwork, the challenge of an extreme agreement system, resulting in the co-edited volume Archie, Complexities of Agreement in Cross-Theoretical Perspective. Now, Marina expands her interest in agreement to other Dagestani languages, especially Khwarshi and Andi, as the principal investigator of the project on external agreement. Well, Marina is a passionate field worker. She does field work since 1995, when we first met in Kibrik's field trip to Tsahur, until now. Marina's target languages were mostly Dagestani languages, but also Mari, Komi, and Hakaz. And she never misses an opportunity to go to the field. And the two reasons not to go are either having a baby or being in a state of pandemic. And even in this October, we plan to go to Dagestan together after the Tempe conference. Well, now we keep our fingers crossed for the next summer. And I'm excited to listen to Marina Chumakina's talk on unusual agreement targets. So Marina, you're welcome to the stage.
Thank you. So shall I share my screen? And I'll do it full screen mode. Oh, just a second, let me just move you out of here. All right, can you see it well? Yeah. Thank you. So I used an opportunity of provided by Zoom to put a background of Dagestan, and especially this is actually the view of Archie village, even that I'm actually covering most of the village itself, but you see the stunning landscape around it. This talk will have a lot of examples from Dagestani languages in general. So I'll be presenting some unusual agreement targets and discussing the morphosyntactic properties. And I must disappoint you from the very beginning. I will not answer the question whether it is agreement or concord, but I will try to pose some more specific questions or present some problems of treating this as one or the other. So when we talk about agreement, it is basically, we talk more or less of a kind of displaced information. So what agreement is a situation where an element in the cause shows or realizes have a morphological realization of a morphosyntactic property which reflects the semantic or formal property of another element. These two elements are called controller and a target. So the controller is the element which dictates what properties should we see on the target, and the target reflects them. When we talk about agreement, it is important to talk about controller and the target, the domain in which they appear, and the features which participate in agreement. So which participate in the agreement relation. So I will show it by example one, illustrated by example one from Archie, obviously, where the controller is NP1 animal or haram, and the book orally, the predicate agrees with it in third gender by prefix b. So here is the formal realization of agreement, whereas the Hawan itself, the controller, does not have a formal realization of gender. This agreement happens in the clause. And that's about all that we need to say about it now, except that Archi is, as an Afghanistani language, is a language of ergative absolutive alignment. So the agreement in the clause is always controlled by the absolutive. Another familiar domain of agreement is an agreement. What is that noise? Is it me? Sorry. There's some noise coming on. Do you? Are you hearing me? Are you hearing me? Okay. Yeah, because I can hear. Anyway, besides clause, there is also another usual agreement domain is NP. So in Archi, the first example is from Archi, where this Ushmin is an NP, my brother, and the pronoun, the genitive pronoun, agrees with brother in the in gender, showing the gender 1 here in prefixally. And notice that when it is the NP agreement within the noun phrase, then the controller is just the head of NP, no matter what case it is in. So here it is in genitive, not absolutive, because NP domain has different rules of agreement than the clausal domain. Another example from Chimane shows another representation of agreement within NP, where the head and 3a it's frog, feminine gender, in 13b it's jaguar, masculine gender, which agrees several attributives. And you see that all these attributives are of different nature, the article or some sort of determiner, proper name or possessor, and well, I suppose an adjective, and they all show masculine or feminine gender respectively, depending on the gender of the head. Such agreements in some theoretical approaches to syntax, this kind of situation is called concord rather than agreement. I should have just mentioned it rather than go further. So what I showed you were kind of most familiar targets. For clausal agreement, it's the verb. For agreement within the NP, it's various types of attributives. However, other types of targets are known to linguistic typology. For example, appositions agreeing with the complements, that happens in Celtic languages, as represented here by Welsh in number 4. So you see that the preposition on agrees in gender with its complement. Of course, this is, as many things, this example is not unproblematic, because as far as I remember, in Welsh it only works if the complement is pronominal as well. So that might raise some objection from other people to treating it as an agreement. Yet it is kind of still, for us, it is okay. A position could be a bit unusual target, but at least the domain of agreement is fine. The proposition and its complement are already connected by some syntactic relations. So it's more or less parallel to the agreement between predicate and its argument. In some senses and in some even interpretations, complements of appositions are their arguments. There is also agreement on nouns, although that is also has been treated by some as problematic. But anyway, within the NP or in relations of possessor and possessum, the agreement can appear on noun. So noun can serve as a target. Here the example is from Central Alaskan Yupik. And also note that agreement is placed or realized by the head of the noun phrase. All this is sort of garden varieties of agreement and quite well known, and that's not what I'm going to talk to you about today. Today, I'm going to talk about agreement which happens in, first of all, with a funny domain or with a funny argument. So if you look at example 6 from Alvar, Here you have an argument, predicate put, which has two arguments, one ergative, nižesca, and one absolutive, raso, and a postpositional phrase to snakal da žaniv, where the postposition žaniv takes superessive as its complement, yet agrees not with the present, which is neuter gender, but with the absolutive of the clause raso, agrees in gender. Note here as well that, as often happen in Dagestanian languages, although verbs in principle agree, but you can never be sure that this particular lexical verb will actually show agreement. So here the verb doesn't show agreement, whereas the adposition does. Before we go a bit more to discuss the unusual targets, I need to introduce the notion of locality. All major theoretical models of syntax make some use of this notion, and within the genitive tradition, it is typically understood as a description of a structural proximity of two nodes in a syntactic structure. And the most local relationships possible is sisterhood between phrases. However, you see that there are quite a lot of references here. It reflects the fact that locality is not actually an uncontroversial notion, and it's a bit hard to, and at most it is a gradient notion, and that is accepted by most of the approaches to locality that we've had looked at. Locality is, as a notion of locality, is used when we talk about argument structure, to the extent that some, so since the syntactic heads impose restrictions on the types of arguments and adjuncts they can occur with, at least some approaches to syntax, theoretical approaches to syntax, treat the relationships between the arguments and between the predicate and its argument as a local relations. In LFG also uses the notion of locality to describe agreement, and the local domain consists minimally of a predicate together with its argument or grammatical functions and is governed. So when we apply the notion of locality to agreement, then we need to say that agreement is mostly the kind of the good examples of agreement are thought of as a local relationships. So if the locality is violated in any ways, it is kind of no longer your prototypical or canonical example of agreement. The first bullet point here talks about the agreement, which also has a name of long distance agreement, which crosses the close boundary. So it's long distance agreement, or a very nice Russian term, прозрачное согласование. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about more kind of fine-grained notions of locality, employ more fine-grained notions of locality. We'll be talking about agreement that is non-local at the level of predicate argument structure, or non-local at the level of sisterhood. So now that I've introduced the domains we're going to discuss, now I'm ready to say that today we'll be talking about both unusual targets and unexpected domains. So unexpected domains are those where target and controller are not in a target and controller are not in the argument predicate relationships, and the controller is not a subconstituent of a local controller. So there is the relationships are non-local. When we talk about unusual targets, the very notion of them being unusual is, again, quite hard to introduce, because surprisingly enough, when you start looking at the tons of literature on agreement, they normally say that the agreement is relations between this and that. And now let's talk about the agreement between predicates and arguments in language X. I only was able to locate one explicit statement about the typological expectations that we have about the targets, and that's this here on your slide from Mark Baker's book of 2008. So basically, verbs, we expect the verbs to be agreement targets. We have less expectations when we talk about adjectives, and we do not expect nouns to agree at all. We don't, causally, we don't expect nouns to participate in the agreement relationships as targets at all. So if we use that as our kind of springboard, if we start looking around, then we notice that there are actually quite a lot of those targets that we don't expect to serve as agreement targets. Baker doesn't say anything about adpositions or adverbs, but I would say that typologically we also don't really expect them to agree. However, if you look at, if you start working in North Pakistani languages, then you see that adpositions and adverbs agree just everywhere. I started from Archie, and then I started looking at other North Pakistani languages, and so that's absolutely ubiquitous. And then, as again, very often with typological work, as soon as you start looking, things that start popping up. So we found the adpositions that agree non-locally, not just in Dagestan, but also in Khoranzi, also in Marind, that's from language from Papua New Guinea, and also in actual Gujarati. You'll see it later, the example from Gujarati. Adverbs have been known to agree. So I just give you some examples that I'll be using in this talk, from Archie, Farsi, Gujarati, Tundranenets, but other examples do pop up in typological literature from Basque, from Hungarian. Various people make various claims about agreeing adverbs. Finally, the nouns, the agreeing nouns, Mark Baker's claim, of course, was not unsubstantiated. It's extremely rare to see nouns agree. Until last year, we thought it was just in North Pakistani language, and even in Dagestan, it is more or less, it is rare. And I show you here Andi, Avarte, Kitakarata, and Dargwa, while only 2 of those have nouns agreeing in core cases. The rest is a kind of adverbial expressions which use nouns, but still they kind of can be interpreted as kind of, we'll talk about it in more detail. So yes, agreeing nouns are extremely rare. It's not for nothing that they never been discussed until now. This list is not exhaustive. There are also agreeing pronouns, agreeing focus particles in Archi. There are also in languages of the world that are agreeing complementizers, agreeing and even agreeing interjections and agreeing conjunctions, but I'm not going to talk about them today. So I'll be just concentrating on adposition, adverbs, and nouns. So some more examples of agreeing adpositions now. In Archi, the agreeing adposition is a postposition epen. So if you look at the example 7, you see it's again a normal ergative absolutive sentence with the verb predicate agreeing with the gazette absolutive. And on the left periphery, you have an adposition phrase. It is a good place for the postpositional phrase to be on the right, not left, right periphery. The postposition epken takes in lative case, and that's the only case it can take. So it has a clear syntactic relationships with its complementizer, yet it agrees with the newspaper, with the gazette. when we first kind of stumbled upon this postposition, we were trying to figure out where it comes from. It comes from an old, obsolete converb, and it actually only thanks to the work on this particular postposition, we realized that there was another converb in the actual language which was not in the existing descriptions. But that converb is really is as a converbial form, it is obsolete and only used with a couple other verbs. But as a postposition, it's only used with this particular verb, so it's kind of the diachronic process at its end. As such, this is the only postposition in Archie which cannot be used adverbially. It cannot be used without the noun. If it's used without the noun, it is just used as a converb. Then you have an extra subject, and then the translation is totally different. You have an extra extra argument there. So, and there are other arguments in favor of treating as a normal postposition. Now, in Gujarati Indic, also a postposition before agrees with the subject, and you see that it also requires a specific form of its complement to be in oblique, and agrees with the subject. Difference with Archie, of course, that it's a nominative subject rather than the absolutive argument of the clause. Coastal marine shows us another postposition which agrees not with its complement. In here it would be a platform, but with the subject of the verb. What is interesting here is the feature in which the apposition agrees. It's person, and again, it is quite unusual to see person appearing on anything but the verb. Kwaranzi shows us a postposition which agrees with both its complement in third singular. Well, we just have to take, okay, it doesn't look like a postposition here because its complement has been topicalized, but that's the only example we have, and we just have to take Lamin's word that it is a postposition, and it agrees not just with its complement, child, but also with the subject of the verb, of the predicate. Now, when we talk about adverbs, it's much more kind of familiar ground because we've seen adverbs, as I said, agreeing adverbs in other languages. And at first, when we look at it, at least in Archie, the situation seems to be quite straightforward. So you have adverb alito for free, which agrees with the car in fourth gender. The only interesting kind of quirk here is the fact that adverbs use an overt for fourth gender singular. They use an overt realization of agreement, whereas verbs have zero agreeing with the fourth gender. So the adverbs have a separate set of morphological realization for agreement than the verbs. But other than that, it agrees with the absolutive, just like verb does. So we can say, well, maybe adverb just behaves just like a verb does. Huarshi represents another, gives you another example of the agreeing adverb. Here, the adverb here agrees with girl in second gender and with the cow in 12b in third gender. The agreeing adverbs in Tundra Nenets interesting in a couple of aspects. First of all, they also use agreement feature of person, although as far as I can remember, diachronically, they as far as I remember, they originate from nouns. The adverbs originate from some case forms of nouns. So and here 13a just shows you that the only possible agreement is with the first singular, just like the verb. However, it is not an agreement with the subject, but Nikolaeva claims that it agrees with the agent. So, and 13b shows that. So it's a passive sentence. The subject is they, but the only possibility of the adverb to agree is to agree with the agent in first singular. Note, however, that the verb agrees with both. So whatever adverb does, it still does something that verb does as well, which is important to remember for now. Now we come to our star guests, the nouns. In Andi, which is an Andic language of Nakhtagistanian family, which we already heard about today, the noun in the effective case agrees in gender with the absolutive of the clause. The separate morphological problem is whether the agreement is part of the realization of the case or not. But if we look at the whole, we're not going I'm not going to discuss that in details. I just flag it as a problem, as a potential problem. What is important here is that here we see two main arguments of the verb, experiencer and the stimulus. And in Nakhtagistanian languages, the verbs of cognition, emotion, and perception very often take non-ergative subjects. It's very often dative, sometimes, as in Semitic language, some kind of locative, and in Andic languages, it is a special case called affective. And in Andi and in one variety of Karata, this case involves agreement. What is problematic here about the theoretical interpretation of this fact is that, first of all that we talked about before, agreeing adpositions and agreeing adverbs, that relations of agreement never involve the whole lexicon. It will be just this handful of lexical items which show some unusual behavior. Whereas here, every noun, absolutely every noun in Andi has a possibility of taking the affective case, and then that case will be would show agreement. Also, so far we looked at the behavior of that of the experiencer, and syntactically, it is hard to claim that this is not a core argument. It is as core argument as the ergative, at least. It has all the syntactic possibilities that the ergative has, as far as we could see so far. Here we have one of the core cases involved in agreement, and the same situation is in Tokita Karata. So in only one variety of Karata, one dialect of Karata, where the effective case is also involves agreement. Although here the agreement is with kind of default agreement with clause. Yeah, there is no absolute argument to agree with. But the experiencer argument follows the verb in agreeing in third gender singular. As I said, this is a rare situation, only happening in Andi group. However, a number of other Dagestanian languages show agreement in locative cases. And I must first of all say that in Nakhtagistanian languages, the nominal paradigm shows very clear cut between locative and non-locative cases. They're formally they're quite different. So one can claim that even that the locative cases are kind of on some level a different part of speech, some sort of adverbials. So example is from a children's book about a fairy tale about Lion and Hare, which starts the very first sentence a very long time ago. A lion used to live in our forests. And you can see that we have here two agreeing nouns. One is time, which is in elative and has a neuter singular, ba, agreeing with the lion, Arslan, and forest, which is in essive case, and it also shows neuter singular agreement. And note that the verb agrees in the same way as the locative forms. Avar shows also has agreeing forms in its locative paradigm, or locative part of the paradigm of noun. Here it's the word prison, and send them to prison agrees in plural with the absolute plural here, and send him to prison agrees in masculine singular with the demonstrative for him, masculine singular. Right, and note that so effectively we have two features, two instantiations of feature on the same noun. So prison itself is neuter, and it will control the neuter agreement on its attributives, and at the same time it is a target for, it serves as a target for a masculine singular agreement. Now the only other place where so far we've been able to found an agreement on nouns is in Ripano, the dialect of Ripano, that's in one of the dialect of Romance. Some of the direct objects and indirect objects or adjuncts can agree in number and gender with the subject of the clause. So example 18, the variation between A and B shows, first of all, the A shows the non-agreeing form of the verb of the word house, and B shows the agreeing variation of the same. It's a feminine noun, but it agrees in masculine with the subject of the clause, Jani. Note that in both cases it keeps controlling the agreement on its on the determiner, which is just what I said before, but now explicit. If we ask ourselves where this nominal agreement comes from, well, first of all, as I said, as agreement as a core case is a rare phenomenon. It's in other languages of Andic branch have a frozen agreement marker for effective case. So it's clear that ba and ra are not your normal case endings in Dagestan. It's clearly a frozen gender markers. But some languages decided that they will stop showing agreement there, whereas Andi and Tekitakarata kept it. However, it is very likely that the diachronic path for the effective was the same as was also from that. It is very likely that effective came to us from the locative paradigm as well, and D shows that in that even on the synchronic level, the effective case can be used in the locative semantics, as you can see in example 19. A young boy appeared before the castle. The postposition before, Kverdi, takes effective as its complement, and that effective agrees also with the absolute of the clause one young boy for sure. Yeah. So now let's see whether we can answer our question, whether it's agreement or concord. Well, it's kind of obvious why it is problematic to think of these examples as agreement, because the control and the target are not in the predicate agreement relations. It is, again, a question how you would describe the category of adpositions or adverbs. You need to say that a handful of adpositions bear an unbounded and an uninterpretable feature, but most of the adverbs and adpositions don't in this particular language. So the kind of the problem is twofold. First of all, the very presence of that feature, and also the fact that it's only part of a very small part of the lexicon which has it. In case of agreeing nouns, the problem, of course, of a clash of genders. So the noun already has a valued feature of gender, lexical gender, and then on top of that, in certain cases, it has to have the unvalued and an interpretable feature, which is part of the definition of agreement in at least how it stands at the moment in minimalism. There were, however, quite successful attempts to interpret some facts of agreement, at least agreeing adpositions, pronouns, and adverbs in Archie that are represented in the book that Katya just mentioned. However, Archie does not have agreeing nouns, so agreeing nouns is still a sore problem, and is probably expecting its theoretical account, waiting for its theoretical account. Second question is whether we can interpret these facts as instances of concord, which indeed has been, there has been a precedent. Irina Nikolaeva interprets the facts of Tundernenets as examples of concord, and her reasoning is that, first of all, that the adverb agrees in the same way as the verb, as I've already shown, so it cannot show a different value of the same feature, but also if the adverb happens to be inside the non-finite clause where the verb does not agree, the adverb cannot agree anymore as well. It renders the sentence ungrammatical. However, in closely related forest tenets, which in every other aspect of agreeing adverbs behaves the same, there are instances of adverbs agreeing even within the non-finite clauses. And the same situation seems to be true for Ngana-san. So at least for these two languages, and these three Semitic languages are quite closely related. So either we have to have different explanation for or interpretation for Enyets and Ngana-san, or maybe we have to reconsider Tundra-Nenets as well. Probably. So there's now two options. So you can see that in Enyets, and this is an example from texts provided by Alicia Hanina. This is the adverb just, and it agrees with nouns, whereas the verb is a non-finite verb, cannot agree with it, right? So it's one problem. For Dagestanian languages, there was not many attempts to account for agreeing targets other than verbs. Keenan, well, I said the proposed analysis, basically it's one sentence. He says we can think of an agreement spreading. Remember, in all those examples that I show you for the adverbs, the adverb agrees in the same way as the verb. And a similar solution is proposed in Yakov Testilet's book of Общий syntaxis, where he says that the agreement is the feature of the clause, and kind of goes on the whole clause, and then ends up on every possible agreeing every item that can agree. However, there are problems with this account as well. First of all, if we look at biabsolutive constructions, so what is biabsolutive construction? Biabsolutive construction is a variation on the clausal structure, where instead of arguments, ergative absolutive arguments in certain verbal forms, you have two absolutives. And the verb, so you have a problem, you have all of a sudden you have two controllers, or two potential controllers. And the verb or predicate wheedles out of the problem quite elegantly, in that most of the languages that I know that have biabsolutive constructions have it with periphrastic forms. So one part of the periphrastic form agrees with the one absolutive. In here it's potato, so this lexical part agrees in potato, borkanche. The copula agrees with the second absolutive, the subject absolutive, pati. Now, if you have however, if you have an adverb in this situation, then there are two potential controllers, two absolutives. What will the adverb agree with? The description, Alexander Gensh's description of Archie, again, has only one line on it and says the adverb then agrees with the patient, the lower absolutive, this one, the potato. So this is the kind of syntactic agreement. However, when I start asking, my informants unanimously agreed that it also can agree, the adverb can also agree with the other absolutive, provided that you can have some semantic interpretation. So you have different interpretation here. Here it's too early for the potatoes to be, the potatoes are not ready yet. Here, Pati is digging the potatoes out early, so Pati got up early and started digging the potatoes. The next question, logical, kind of, but never occurred to me unless someone else suggested it in some conferences. He asks, and what happens if you have two adverbs in the biabsolutive construction? Right, so example 23 shows you the possible answer to this question. Well, first of all, of course, the syntactic option is also viable. Yeah, you can agree both of them with the lower absolutive, the house, the patient. So I'm forever fixing his house for free. Oh, it's a biabsolutive construction. I in the absolutive, house the second absolutive. Muarshi is a complex predicate where the lexical part agrees with the house and the copula agrees with the first absolutive, me. If you have two adverbs, they can either agree with the house, both of them, or one, if the interpretation is possible, one can agree with the higher, the subject absolutive, and another with the second absolutive, patient absolutive. No other options is possible. So you cannot crisscross. You cannot do fourth here, for gender here, gender four here, gender one here. You cannot, and you cannot really do gender one for both of them. So that was the kind of semantic agreement was the only one that my informant was happy with. And then I thought, why don't I ask the same question about a negative sentence? And of course I thought that, well, nothing agrees with the ergative in gender clausally in nothing in Dagestan. And then I only thought about it a couple of weeks ago, so I had to ask my informant via WhatsApp, and only one informant. So please don't quote me on that. But when I sent her this sentence, say, look, if we have ergative and absolutive and synthetic form of the verb, can you still have one of the adverbs agreeing with the ergative? He said, yeah, of course. So I'm still kind of trying to come out of the shock, but it's only, again, it was only one informant. She probably has been primed because we were talking about different possibilities for agreeing adverbs, but still she's actually normally quite good, and there was also a mistake in that particular clause, and she spotted that mistake. And she didn't say anything about the adverb. So probably it is probably still a possibility. So all this makes the interpretation of concord problematic. So here, the adverb does not behave the same as the verb at all. And Tanti Dargwa shows us the same possibility. So in Tanti Dargwa, we have the agreeing locative forms of the nouns. So this is at Magomed's house. Rasul Itzmit, the sentence is Rasul Itzmit at Magomed's house, and you see that this is negative and the absolutive meet, and the predicate is has the incliticized copula. Yeah, and notice the copula here also agrees with the ergative. So that Dargwa, well, I mean, this is example from Tanti, but Dargwa, I think in general, has the possibility of agreeing with the ergative. There is a syntactic account of that, complicated one proposed by Nina. What I'm now just want to, my point is he is much more straightforward. I'm just saying, look, there is a possibility for agreeing with the ergative. Can the locative take up on this possibility? Yes, it can. It can. This particular one, Magomed, can also agree not with just meet, but also with Rasul in certain situations. What's much worse is that this variation of the agreement of the locative is possible not just in the copula clauses, but also in the clauses which only have a synthetic verb form, like here the future. It's a synthetic form of the future, agreeing with the newspaper, Gazette, but the agreeing locative can agree either with Gazette here or with the ergative of Musa. Same here, if it's prohibitive, whoops, I'm sorry, the translation is wrong. The translation should not be reading a newspaper. It's prohibited of reading newspaper, so it's a prohibitive, agreeing with the newspaper, and again the locative form of the noun allows variation and agreement. And finally, if it is an imperative, the same thing. Yeah, the imperative agrees with the book, but the locative noun can agree either with that book or with the addressee of the imperative. So this examples, in my personal opinion, render the theoretical, render the concord solution impossible. We need to think of some other solution. Whether it will be a small clause or something else, it still needs to, we still need to think about it. So there are some outstanding questions about this kind of agreement of unusual targets, which we need to answer first before I can offer you any conclusions. But the conclusions will be offered at the end of, hopefully at the end of our project in the book, which is also, unsurprisingly, is called Unusual Targets, Unexpected Domains, which we are writing at the moment. Thank you very much. I'm finished.
Okay, thank you, Marina. Thank you very much. And we are about 10 minutes before our schedule, so we have a lot of time for questions, comments, suggestions.
Yes.
So, Marina, would you please
yeah.
So unshow your screen.
Yes.
So that I see people. Yeah. So the first question is by Pavel Rudnev.
Yeah. Please. Yes.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Very interesting, thanks. That's quite a lot to process. So I wonder if you're not shooting yourself in the foot by, let's say, limiting agreement to argument-predicate relations, because you say everything else is a problem because XP and YP are not in an argument and predicate relation. But neither argument nor predicate are theoretical primitives, right? They don't even have to be in a local relation, right? So I mean, but if we reformulated locality, let's say the locality requirement in terms of sisterhood, right, combined with postulating, let's say, unvalued features on certain heads, that could also be well, that could also affect probing from the maximal projections. Then the locality problem for most of the cases you've discussed will disappear. So an adverbial phrase adjoining to a verb phrase will probe will agree with the verb phrase under sisterhood. That's it.
Except for when it doesn't. Except when it agrees separately, independently. Yeah, but I mean, it's obviously more complicated than that, right? But it'll take care of, let's say, 2/3 of your cases. Okay. Right. Plus, I didn't really get. So the biaxial construction, right? So you have two adverbs with two interpretations and multiple agreement possibilities. That's example 23, I think, right? This is compatible with let's say two adjunction sites for adverbs. Yeah. A high one and a low one, and then exactly your interpretations follow, which also takes care of the previous example discussed by Kubrick, right? Where you get two no, actually, these are your examples, right? About the potatoes and being ready quickly. Or early, was it, whatever? Yeah, early, so, yes, yeah. So you either adjoin early, low, and then it agrees with the potatoes, and, or you adjoin higher, and it agrees with the other one. So yeah. But very, very interesting, especially the nouns. Yeah, but then you have to then almost like posit a separate agreement system, which is different from the predicates, because because the predicate, synthetic predicate, never reacts to agent. It cannot agree with the ergative. So yeah, that's the main. This is tentative, right? So you say. It's, yeah, well. Maybe the ergative is, or maybe it's a biclausal structure, two juxtaposed clauses, topicalization accompanied by an adjunct, and then yeah, I mean. Maybe, yeah. We are actually pursuing this path of research for Huashi at the moment, I think. But wouldn't it be great if Archie ended up having subject agreement, or I mean, with the ergative? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So the next question is by Dmitry Gerasimov and then Irina Burukina, okay?
Marina, thank you very much. This was fascinating. I got curious about your very brief comment concerning the diachrony of agreement on nominals in Dagestanian and ID specifically. I wonder if we could suppose that specifically in ID, it just could be a kind of second position clitic doubling the absolutive argument that got fused with the initial nominal, either the ergative subject or the, so to say.
Why then does it restrict itself to the effective only? Why don't we have it in ergative?
Okay, good point.
So I think it's highly unlikely for Dagestani languages to have second position clitics. So historically, diachronic.
Yeah, that kind of not the languages which we remember when we say second position clitics. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Irina Burukina, please. unmute you.
Right. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you for the talk. Like wonderful data, amazing. I just have a minor question, like a naive one. So maybe I missed it. What about categorical distinctions? Because it's not that clear for me that in many languages we have this clear-cut distinction, for instance, between adverbs and adjectives, right? And then we also have languages where adpositions are regularly called like relative noun or relation nouns, right? And then we have more like possessive construction there. So especially those Tundranenets examples that you showed, they look very much like depictives to me, at least, and like adjectival / depictive. So I was curious about whether you can make this clear-cut distinction for all of those languages that you mentioned.
It is hard. And we aware of the problem of depictives and of the adjectives, adverb, especially for Romans. I'm actually not sure how to pronounce it. That's the new one. For Romans, it is, they even call it adverbial adjectives or adjectival adverbs or something like that. Yeah. So yeah, it is a problem. However, for at least for Dagestanian, it is languages, it is at least the adverbs and adpositions can be put together, and they have quite different behavior from everything else. And nouns.
Yeah. And a further small question. So in those Dagestanian languages, for example, do they have any special morphology that can further help to distinguish between different classes, or only like different syntactic behavior?
Yeah,
okay.
Archie does, because Archie has a special set of Archie. Yeah, it's not for nothing they've got extreme agreement system. It has at least three formal systems of realizing agreement. One for attributives, one for pronouns and adverbs, and one for verbs, and they are morphologically different.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So Mark Baker can ask his question, and then Nina Zumbato will make her comment.
Yes, that would be very nice.
All right, thank you. So I too enjoyed all the fascinating data and all the cases that showed that I didn't know what I was talking about in 2008, among other things. One sort of comment, though, leading into a question is in generative grammar, it's proved to be very useful to say that morphologically complex words often are built out of several distinctive syntactic elements. And so, you know, a classic case from English is that the finite verb is really the realization of two distinct elements, the tense node and the verb node. And then once you do that, you find out that verbs in English don't, strictly speaking, as, you know, this sort of syntactic element, verbs don't actually agree with the subject. Rather, it's the tense node that does once you've distinguished the two. Now, I understand that there are reasons for, you know, talking about it other ways too, saying verbs do agree with the subject, that's fine. But there's a level of analysis where the tense agrees with the subject, not the verb. Then if we take that to your fascinating cases about where a noun agrees with the direct object, I was thinking, you know, as you're saying that, you know, I've never seen that, that couldn't happen. Then you showed the example, and that's great. But then it is sort of interesting then that it's an oblique subject that agrees with the verb. And as you sort of said, well, oblique subjects are really like prepositional phrases. Well, oblique subjects.
I didn't say that, actually.
I'll say that. So oblique subjects are kind of continuous with other oblique nominals, maybe. And oblique nominals are kind of continuous with adpositional phrases. So if you analyze if you analyze this particular kind of subject as a noun plus something else that's adposition like, and then you convinced yourself that it was really the adposition like element that agreed rather than the noun that agreed, maybe we would still say there's a theoretical sense in which nouns never agree, but adpositions can. and we'd make a kind of typological prediction that there would never be a language with uncase marked subjects where the subject still agreed with the object.
So far, yeah, we'll be looking like anything for that, for an example like that. So far, we found one example from a dead language where the pronominal subjects seem to be agreeing with the pronominal object. I cannot remember the name. It's somewhere from Central America. I can add later to the presentation. But yeah, in general, yes, in general, it is true. It's only so far from. So what I'm trying to say is that it's a dead language, so the data might be unreliable. So for what we have now for the reliable data, yes, it's only quirky or funny subjects or funny arguments that agree. The problem is that because it is Pakistani languages, the notion of subject is kind of problematic, and it's hard to delineate really, because even the ergatives are kind of also can be thought of as quirky subjects in some sort. So, and that's just the nature of these languages. We probably will never be able to give the one definitive answer in the end. But of course, yeah, that's of course we don't want the nouns to agree. Of course, we don't want subjects to agree. So that's yeah.
Well, whether we want to or not, it may be that they don't once we've sort of,
yes, yeah,
analyze the data a bit more, anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And as for your first suggestion about the different nodes for tense and green tense, if I give you a very crude answer to that, is that if I start pursuing this, I probably will lose my job. But no, in general, I do believe in inferential realization of morphology. So I really do. I'm not going to defend it right now, but yeah, for me, it's very hard to think of agreement as belong,
I understand that they're
minimalistic terms. Yes,
I understand that there are different frameworks here. Yeah.
So Nina, are you ready to comment on this?
I'm not showing myself. So if I just wanted to say that if the last example from RT that your informant provided recently is correct, it's still correct. It's very different from Dargois, because in Dargois, well, you said it's complicated. I'm not going to repeat all that stuff, but I strongly object against the agreement with the ergative. Well, my analysis and the analysis by Dmitry Ganenkov, which is a bit different, but it has the same main point. Well, so we don't have agreement with the ergative. All we have is a kind of agreement with some hidden absolutive. And a good argument, well, it will be too tiresome to give many examples, but a good argument in favor of that is that in dependent clauses, dependent clauses headed by a non-finite form, in Dargois, the ergative agreement is prohibited.
Oh, sorry, I missed the last.
Any dependent clause headed by a non-finite form, converb, infinitive, participle, etc., etc., the ergative agreement is impossible, and you know it.
Right. Yes. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. I hope we'll have a.
The whole question is what you mean by symbolic 2019.
That's from your talk at SLE conference last year. Isn't it?
Sorry, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Людмила Хохлова.
Yes, actually, I wanted to continue the question that has been asked already about the definitions of adjectives and adverbs and about Gujarati. This complex postposition in Gujarati can be described as the genitive of pronoun plus just a masculine or feminine form of this so-called adverb or adjective. Like, it's better to explain it in Russian. He, меня, первая, came, he, she, меня, то есть he, меня, первый пришел, she, меня,
Понятно, меня, как бы меня первее.
And actually, I wanted to say that the same thing is possible both in Gujarati and Rajasthani. With the, they can be called the adjectives or adverbs. For instance, the horse is moving slowly. If the horse is masculine, then this adverb will be masculine. If the horse is feminine, it will be feminine. Should we? We always told to the students that they are adjectives. So actually in Russian you have члены предложения и части речи, and there you actually are they adverbs or adjectives?
Well, I'm no expert on those languages, but the paper on which we based it claims they're adverbs. So I cannot say more than that at the moment. But thank you very much. We'll look into it as well. Thank you. So you're saying the horse, even if the horse is doesn't change its form, even if the horse doesn't change its form, the adverb can change its form?
The horse is moving slowly.
Yeah.
So slowly can have both masculine and feminine form. I can
Whereas
send you these examples from Rajasthani. Should I? I can send you examples about the horse feminine.
Yes, that would be great. Yeah, thank you very much.
Masculine from Rajasthani, from Marwari.
Yeah, oh, that would be lovely. Thank you.
More questions, comments? So maybe I may ask a question about the features which manifest themselves in this agreement or concord. So as far as I understand, mostly you have shown external agreement and unusual agreement in gender and number, so not in person. Yeah.
No. Yeah.
So the question is, for languages where person agreement is possible, like Dargwa, where person agreement is omnivorous. We take two core arguments, ergative and absolutive, and then select the one with the more marked person feature. And this is a controller. Maybe this system influences the agreement in gender and number, and the possibility to have agreement with the ergative, though Nina believes that it's the agreement with the absolutive, which is an empty category in Nichols. So probably this is this gender number agreement with ergative is parasitic on person agreement, which is absent in the case of the third person. So probably it's a possible way to go.
Yeah, that was exactly my thoughts. Yes, yeah, it is. I think it's I agree with you totally.
I'm glad to hear.
But it's a bit harder to prove it, to prove it and show some explicit data for it. But we're working. I think exactly the same, because that's what what Alexander Ginch always said, that as soon as you start having the person feature, as soon as person feature enters into the language, so does the nominative absolute, nominative accusative alignment or orientation or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. So I think that's probably a reflex of that. Yeah.
So if no other comments or questions.
I can also ask a question.
Timur.
I'm not sure you mentioned that in the beginning, maybe you did. What if a converb has a gender agreement slot, which agrees with the absolutive argument of the main clause? Am I right that this is also counted as a non-local agreement in your clause?
Yes. It's actually, yeah. That is actually the case that was presented by Denis Purcell, and which he first called external agreement. But in some sense, the converb has the clause, and therefore this agreement kind of crosses the clausal boundary, and that's why we just excluded for now from discussion. Yeah, but yeah, it is it's a particular case of this, yeah, of the same. Yeah, thank you.
Any more questions? So, well, if there are no questions or comments, so thank you, Marina, again for agreeing for your wonderful talk. It was very interesting.